Operation Replace Brandon Aiyuk moves full steam ahead. Chris Brazzell II, the tall, lanky receiver out of the University of Tennessee, is the 49ers' latest reported top 30 visit. They now have 5 top 30 visits dedicated to wide receivers. History tells us, based on that number, that the 49ers will indeed draft that wideout position of need. You know what else history tells us? The 49ers are going to pay Trent Williams. And I think that it's a really good time to start looking at what they paid him back when they were facing a similar situation in 2024. And then we can gauge and potentially even evaluate, once this deal is done, the contract here in 2026. But back in 2024, when Trent Williams had no guaranteed money left and the 49ers needed to thread a needle, they gave him $48 million fully guaranteed. It broke down as such: $25.7 million in signing bonus immediately in 2024. That plus a veteran minimum base salary was Trent Williams' pay for the immediate upcoming season. And then there was a fully guaranteed roster bonus of about $20 million that was paid out to Trent Williams in 2025. He got that plus a base minimum salary of just over $1 million. You added up all 4 of those components, and it came out to $48 million fully guaranteed over 2 seasons for Trent Williams. Those, of course, were the 2024 and 2025 seasons. They did tack on the current amount that Trent Williams is set to make in his contract, non-guaranteed for 2026, but that is what we call funny money. It was essentially only there, and there was, what, $32.2 million of it. That's what is scheduled to come Trent Williams' way now. It was essentially only there to bump up his average per year to number 1 amongst all tackles. We see funny money, vanity money a lot. This, I think, is important to Trent Williams. Remember, when he initially signed this contract back in 2021, David Bakhtiari of the Green Bay Packers gave him a hard time because Trent barely edged out, I think, by $10,000 per year. He barely edged out David Bakhtiari's salary for number 1 amongst all tackles. So this stuff is important to Trent Williams. It was important back in 2024 that they tack on the non-guaranteed money here in 2026 so that he could be number 1 on the tackle list. But functionally, the deal was 2 years, $48 million, $24 million per year. Funny money in year 3. Now they've reached year 3. They've got to renegotiate the funny money. It's set at $32.2 million. It's probably going to be a 2-year agreement again, in effect, for Trent Williams. They can add a third of funny money if he so desires. But how much guaranteed money is going to fall in those 2 years? If it was $48 million a couple years ago, he's obviously gotten older now, so the 49ers are not willing to commit as much. There's been some rumbling online that maybe $36 million fully guaranteed with the ability to make more in 2027, but not in a guaranteed fashion right now, could be what threads the needle for Trent Williams. We shall see. We wait with bated breath for the 49ers to get this done. I do believe that both sides would like to have something done before the NFL draft. I don't think they have to have something done before the NFL draft if they're on the same page. But just to set parameters, that's where for the 49ers and Trent Williams are right now. All right, back to that wide receiver position. Chris Brazzell II has visited. As I said, tall, lanky receiver from Tennessee. In fact, the only player invited to this year's NFL Scouting Combine, taller than 6'4", who weighs under 200 pounds. He's 198 pounds, and I think that's been a concern, especially if the 49ers want good run blockers. I think they may have to bulk up Chris Brazzell II in order to be able to deliver what they need to on the perimeter. That being said, I mentioned 5 wide receivers are now part of the 49ers' top 30 visit list, and that's just what's been reported so far. And 2 of these five wide receivers are tall and notably lanky. The last one that we talked about on Friday, Caleb Douglas out of Texas Tech, is almost 6'4" and just a little bit over 200 pounds. And we talked about the potential need of Caleb Douglas to fill out his frame at the NFL level. But that's what a professional weight room is for. 49ers obviously love the sub 4.4 speed of both Brazzell and Caleb Douglas paired with that height. These guys are burners. These guys can stretch the field, and they may be ideal to pair with Mike Evans and company, especially after the 49ers were able to add veterans like Evans, like Christian Kirk into the receiving room to give themselves a temporary higher floor. They obviously need the receiver position restocked for beyond 2026. Take a look at the 5 receivers that the 49ers have picked for top 30 visits so far this year. They actually seem to cover the entire range of the 49ers' 6 selections in this 2026 NFL draft when it comes to their draft grade and projected spot of selection. Casey Concepcion, first or second round guy. Omar Cooper Jr., first or second round guy. Denzel Boston, probably a first round guy, but the 49ers have picks in the first and the second. Then they have nothing in the third. Then they have 4 picks in the fourth round. Both Caleb Douglas and Chris Brazzell II. So what the 49ers are doing here is giving themselves optionality. I always talk about don't focus on individual players in the draft. Focus on the strategy. And that is exactly how front offices think, and that's how the 49ers are approaching this particular situation. They have given themselves, or are giving themselves, the ability to pick a receiver with one of their first 2 picks, and they're also giving themselves the ability to pick a receiver with one of their 4 fourth-round picks. In general, the edge rushing talent in this draft falls off severely after the first couple of rounds. So it might be advisable for the 49ers to attack the defensive line need earlier, number 27 or number 58, and then the receiver need a little bit later. Somebody like Chris Brazzell, somebody like Caleb Douglas, those are both receivers with some flaws. Brazzell, as I mentioned, a little light. Caleb Douglas, a little bit light. Caleb Douglas dropped 7 passes last year. Brazzell, I think, a little bit better with his hands, but you got to wonder how long it's going to take to develop a whole route tree. About half of his routes were either go routes or hitches in 2025 for Tennessee, where he did lead the SEC in yards per reception. So the guy's explosive, but can the guy be a complete NFL receiver? That remains to be seen. However, you get what you pay for. And if you don't draft a receiver until that 4th round, you probably are going to be drafting somebody who needs some development. The 49ers, though, have given themselves optionality on that end by bringing in veterans like Mike Evans and Christian Kirk. You don't need a polished receiver right away, and I think they've set themselves up well to go after receiver a little bit later in this NFL draft. And the picks certainly do match at least a couple of the prospects that have been reported in for top 30 visits. Over the past 4 years, whenever the 49ers have brought in 5 or more players at the same position for 30 visits, they have drafted at least 1 player at that position. Mike did a great job digging back into this, but 2022, they brought in 5 visits at running back, and Ty Davis-Price out of LSU was the 49ers pick. In 2023, they brought in a ton of tight end visits, and they actually drafted 2 tight ends, Cam Latu and Braden Willis, who's still with the football team. In 2024, the 49ers scouted wide receiver heavily, and they drafted Ricky Pearsall. In 2025, they brought in a ton of defensive ends, and they ended up drafting Michael Williams. Kyle Borgononi followed up on some of this by looking at wide receiver visit counts, and he found that if a team has hosted 5 or more wide receivers on top 30 visits over the past decade, 65% of the time they have drafted a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds. For the 49ers, that might be a little bit different because they don't have that 3rd round pick. I think that the fact that they have 4 fourth rounders means that mentality-wise, at least one of their 4th rounders will be like a 3rd round pick. And obviously, when you look at guys like Caleb Douglas or like Chris Brazzell II, you are talking about a potential 4th round selection for San Francisco. But the other receivers they've looked at, those guys could potentially go in the first 2 rounds, and trades could still happen in the NFL draft as well to give the 49ers more picks either early or more picks later, and perhaps they'll attack the position that way. But the one stat that I constantly bring up is that outside of Brandon Aiyuk, who doesn't count here, 49ers have only 1 receiver on their roster who scored a touchdown in their uniform under contract beyond 2026, and that is Ricky Pearsall. So you're going to have to fortify this wide receiver position if you are San Francisco. We've got about a week and a half until the NFL draft. 49ers finished last week fortifying the roster with veterans to better insulate themselves ahead of this draft. They added Cam Sample, the very versatile defensive end. I think they still need to add more bodies along that defensive line. However, they may be done on the veteran market in this pre-draft process. We'll see who they do draft. We've talked about Malachi Lawrence. We've talked about Romello Height. There are other names that the 49ers are certainly discussing. If they do add a defensive lineman, then we will regroup after the draft to see what the 49ers must do to complete the defensive line room moving forward. They're going to do the same, and maybe that's when Joey Bosa can come back into the serious discussion for the 49ers. Then there's the case of the DB room, where the San Francisco has signed both Nate Hobbs and Jack Jones, a pair of cornerbacks over the course of free agency. Jones was at the end of last week, and I've been digging into some of the numbers for Jack Jones. He was not good in man coverage last year. He gave up all 6 of his touchdowns in man coverage, but take a look at how good Jack Jones was in zone coverage. None of his touchdowns, again, given up in zone coverage, allowed only 0.42 yards per cover snap when in zone coverage, which is elite. And then here are the ratings against for cornerbacks in zone coverage last year. Jones ranked 6th, lower the better. Quinyon Mitchell was at the top. Cooper DeJean, another Eagle in there. Jack Jones playing for the Miami Dolphins, a rating of only 56.3, only 0.42 yards per cover snap allowed into zone coverage. 49ers ran zone about 75% of the time last year. There's a chance that Raheem Morris wants to run a little bit more man. He's been about 50-50 with both the Rams and the Falcons. That's still TBD, though. Maybe the 49ers do stay in a zone structure. We do know that Jack Jones has been a good zone corner, and because of how solidly he performed in those circumstances, because of this defense's history playing a lot of zone, it seems like it could be a good high upside depth option for the 49ers. Just a little bit to chew on this Monday morning. Trent Williams, Jack Jones, and of course, Chris Brazzell II, the 49ers' 5th reported top 30 visited receiver. Yes, Operation Replace Brandon Aiyuk is moving full steam ahead.